Okay. All right, great. We're live. So hi everybody in Facebook land as well as in this land. Nice to see you. And I'm gonna dispense with a lot of introductions because many of you have already seen Adam DePaul here before with us. So I'm gonna hand it over to Adam to do more of an introduction. And then we're gonna start our journey into part 2 of the Lenape Nation. So thank you, Adam, again for being here. We appreciate you. And here you go.
Well, one issue. Thank you so much, Heather. It's wonderful to be back
Initiate.
here. Ew. Delawangthi Adam Bimach DePaul. My name is Adam Waterbear DePaul. Lepuinu ni Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania. I'm a council member of the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania. Ok Nulhalauk Nekacheme Wakanak. And I'm the tribal storykeeper. I'm also the chief of education, and I just love having the opportunity to talk to people about the Lenape people and the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania. And it's really a joy to be back here for part 2, because it'll give me an opportunity to delve more in depth through some of the surface, very important but kind of surface material of our history and presence that I do in the kind of general talk that we had in part 1. So I want to make sure we do go beyond. We don't just repeat everything we did in part 1, but I know there are probably some people here who weren't there for the first bit. So I'm going to just as an incredibly brief reorientation to the Lenape people. We are the indigenous people of Eastern Pennsylvania, Southern New York, all of New Jersey, and Northern Delaware. My nation, the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania, is a nation based in Pennsylvania. Now, our members are all throughout the country and continent, but we are one of 4 homeland nations of the Lenape people. That is the Lenape who remained in their homeland and were not forcibly removed into the diaspora. We also have nations of homeland Lenape in New Jersey state and Delaware state. And our diaspora, those who were forced out of our homeland, have nations in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and in Ontario, Canada. So last time I really delved into that history. We talked about a little bit about pre-colonial times, the relationship with William Penn, William Penn's sons, the walking purchase, our diaspora, our homeland Lenape, and how they were able to remain, the hiding times, the centuries in which we had to pass our ways down in secret when we remained here, but it wasn't okay to be Lenape in public. And we came up to what the nation is doing today to revitalize our culture. Things like our language program, the weekly language classes we teach, the Rising Nation River Journey that we've been doing since 2022 that helps us maintain our role as stewards of the environment by partnering with our environmental organizations. And well, yeah, that's the very Cliff Notes version of it. So I'd really like to get interaction this time. I do much prefer a conversation to a lecture. Last time we had Q&A at the end, but I'd like to actually start off this time asking the folks that are here what you'd like to hear more about. There's so much to talk about: our pre-colonial life, traditional ways of the Lenape people, the hiding times, the relationship with William Penn. Of course, I'm the nation's storykeeper, so my passion is our traditional stories, our ceremonial stories, our creation stories, our mythological stories, and just stories I've heard from my elders that we pass on to keep wisdom from our elders going down to our youths. Our environmental collaborations, our relationship to the Delaware River. So I can talk for hours if there's nothing in particular that you want to bring up, but let me first open it up to you. This, like I said, this is an opportunity to kind of get beyond that just surface level talk. Is there anything anyone here would like to hear more about, or any questions you have to get us started in any direction?
Yeah, I had a question. I
Sure.
think that you briefly mentioned that your nation of the four were not forcibly removed. Could you clarify which nations which were forcibly removed and why your nation was not forcibly removed?
Sure. So beginning about the era of Penzance, the walking purchase, when bounties were put on our heads and publicized in the Pennsylvania Gazette, that's when the Lenape people as a whole became fractured. Our nation became fractured, and many Lenape people were pushed out, were forced out, or fled for their lives, and they went in all directions. Um, I don't want to go too in detail because I did cover some of this before, but generally, the through these years and decades, and in some cases centuries of forced upheaval and removal, our people, they might go as far as Western Pennsylvania, look around, feel like it's safe, settle, begin to reestablish their communities, and then colonialism would catch up with them and they'd uproot and have to move again. So this went on and on and on. Um, so the nations that we have today, now it's important to understand that there are Lenape people and Lenape descendants all throughout the country and continent, and I'm sure some have moved beyond the continent by now. Um, but when we talk about the actual Lenape nations that exist, the organizations that have their own council, govern themselves, and are known as Lenape nations today, those diasporic groups, there are two nations in Oklahoma. One is in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and one is in Anadarko, Oklahoma. And then there's the Stockbridge Munsee Band in Wisconsin. And then a group of some of our folks got pushed up over the United States border into Ontario, and there are two nations up there that are recognized by the Canadian government. So those are the five diaspora nations, and they are the five nations that have federal recognition by their respective countries. So the way that some Lenape were able to stay here, it could happen a few ways. Some of us went into hiding in small groups. Some of us were brought into indentured servitude on large plantations or on land with landowners. But the primary way was through marriages with colonial men, between colonial men and Lenape women. And last time I talked about some of the reasons why colonial men tended to take a strong liking to marrying our women based on their hard work and their masterful knowledge of agriculture. But those are the ways, and primarily through intermarriages, that our people were able to remain here. And the four nations today, in Pennsylvania, the two nations in New Jersey, and the nation in Delaware are largely represented by those of us who remained in those ways.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think there's a question in the chat as well.
Ah,
Yes, I don't know if you can see the chat,
I
but
just brought it up. Yes.
cool.
Ooh, are there any megalithic sites or mounds that were made that may still exist to visit or not? Yes, there absolutely are. We have a director of sacred sites, a wonderful person who dedicates all of his energy to identifying and, to whatever extent he can, preserving our sacred sites. You find them, some of them are historically noted, just areas where we would hold important events, ceremonies. Some of them definitely still have physical remains, stone walls, etchings, and that kind of thing. Now, as far as are there places that you can visit, the answer is yes, there are, but it depends on the site. And we don't openly advertise every sacred site that we discover. I hope that you can understand why. We don't want to turn our important places into tourist attractions, right? But there are some places that are already on the public radar, some places you can find in maps. One place that I bring up that is very well publicized, has been for a long time, is Cold Air Cave, which is a little cave along the side of the Delaware in the Delaware water gap area. So if you're interested, feel free to get in touch. And what I will do is I'll be happy to put you in touch with John Strongwind, our director of sacred sites, and he can give you general information about sites and let you know if there are specific sites in your area that are okay for people to visit and we don't mind talking about.
Hi, Adam.
Hey, Maria.
Hey, I have a question that's a bit related to what you were talking about and Jake's question regarding the going into hiding period and how knowledge and stories and practices were maintained throughout that hiding period. But also, I mean, I guess this is a larger question that you could address now or throughout your talk. But I am just interested in hearing from you how those practices, knowledge, stories, were not only preserved, but also there was evolution and progress and change throughout that process of those practices. Because yeah, there's just this association sometimes that people have with indigenous knowledge as static in time, and I think we all fall into that or can be constrained by that sometimes. So I'm interested in that. I know that's a large question, but maybe you have examples of how there was the interaction with many things help the knowledge evolve and change throughout time, and also maintain. I think there's those things that can coexist. So yeah.
Oh, I love the question. And see where, well, first let me start by talking about some physical ways that knowledge was preserved. Okay, this is definitely going to lead into the oral tradition, and I can talk on that for days. So I'm going to try not to spiral out of control on that. But before I go down that wormhole, there are some ways in which our people pass tradition down physically. At our cultural center, we have the exhibit that we put together with the University of Pennsylvania in 2008. And one of the wonderful things about that exhibit is that it was one of the first, if not the first, exhibit that was co-curated by Lenape people and focused on the story of those of us who remained behind. Focused on the hiding times. It gives some great history before then, but really told our story, which was largely untold and still is largely untold. So some of the artifacts, that exhibit, by the way, that did, I believe, 3 years, just about 3 years at the Penn Museum. And now when it finally retired, it's at our cultural center in Easton, Pennsylvania, if anybody wants to come out and see it. But some of the artifacts we have there in the hiding time period, there's probably the most powerful is a doll. Many Lenape children, particularly Lenape girls, had dolls passed down to them. This became kind of a tradition. There were several of our elders who knew about these dolls, and one of them had them and graciously passed it to us for the exhibit. And the doll, let's see, I'm not going to try to mess with screen sharing, but what I will do is I'm going to paste a link in the chat
Okay.
to an exhibit we have up at Haverford College right now. It's an exhibit on our art, and you can actually see this doll. It's definitely on display in the exhibit. It might also be on the online portion. So there's a link to that wonderful Haverford exhibit. But the doll looks just like a normal colonial doll. It's a little fair-skinned girl. Of course, they will look a little different from time to time, but they're typically fair-skinned. They have brown or fair hair. They're dressed in nice colonial plaid dresses. But if you take the doll and you turn it around, and you lift the hair off the back of the head, what you'll see is underneath the hair in the back of the head, there's another face stitched in the back of the doll. And the face is stitched in the same color as the cloth. So you kind of have to look decently close to see it. But if you know to look for it, you'll see it there. And that hidden face was there to remind these Lenape children that they have to wear two faces in this community, that they have to present themselves in the way that's acceptable, but that they can never forget their Lenape heritage, and that even though they have to keep it hidden, it is there. That's a wonderful thing to actually look at if you have a chance to get down to the Haverford exhibit. Other ways, and these are more kind of symbolic, if you want to, you might call them spiritual ways. The rocks are just like everything else, just like all our relations, the four-leggeds, the winged ones, the fish, the creepy crawlers, the standing trees. The grandfather stones are very revered, and people often would say prayers into rocks, and that rock would hold that prayer, and that rock would become sacred and important to a family, especially if multiple people had said prayers into it. So Lenape women who kept Lenape gardens within the colonized Lenapehoking, some of them would they would keep these prayer rocks, and they would make these the rocks that they put around their garden. And then they would pass these rocks down to their children, and they would pass them down to their children. We have a clan mother today who still has her great-grandmother's rocks. And this was another way to keep our tradition alive. There's lots of other things like this. Oh, one more I'll mention, and we have you can see this in our exhibit that we have at the Cultural Center, the pen exhibit, is many people have come across the medicine bag, right? The medicine bag is something that's been pretty popularized in Native American culture. And it's one of the things, Hollywood gets a lot of things wrong. But there is truth to medicine bags, medicine pouches in Native culture, certainly in Lenape culture. Many people would carry a small pouch, often around their neck or on their belt, or if they didn't keep it with them all the time at home. And in that bag, you would put anything that spoke to you throughout your life, things that were significant. It might contain, for instance, your child's first baby tooth that fell out, maybe the bone of an animal, your first successful hunt when you became a hunter, a particular rock that was given to you by your first love or by your spouse or something. So throughout your life, you would put these things in your medicine pouch. Now, this, you couldn't walk around in the colony pretending to be a colonist with a medicine pouch hanging around your neck. So people found ways to keep this practice on, but repurpose them. And something that some people would do, and this actually included my family. My mother can talk about her family's way of doing this. I I don't remember if it was her aunt or her grandmother, but there's a sachet. I never knew what a sachet was until I heard about this practice, but a pouch that some people will keep in the back of their drawers, bureau drawers of clothes, and they'll put nice smelling things in it so it kind of keeps their clothes smelling nicely. Well, Lenape people would get in the habit of keeping their medicine pouches back in their bureau drawers and sewing them up with fabric to disguise them as sachets. And then when they wanted to add to it, they could open it up and add to it and sew it back up. So those are just a few of the ways that we maintained our practices however we could. Now, of course, when we talk about the actual transmission of information, so much of the stories we told, of the culture we told, so much of our communication was through the oral tradition. And there's a number of reasons for that. If you were here last time, if you saw part one, I probably talked about this, but our language was never written pre-colonialism. Our language was only spoken. It was colonists who came over and first invented writing systems for our language, largely for the purpose of converting us. They would write, they would transcribe Bibles, sermons, other religious documents to give to our people to bring us into the church. So it was first just tradition that the way we passed things down was orally. We didn't write books. We didn't have that written language system. So that was already our practice. Now, coupled with that, you didn't want to produce an artifact of Lenape traditions and customs. Even for those of us who were taught to write our language, you didn't want a book that was hidden away and talked about these things, because our culture was still considered heathen, and coming across that kind of thing could get the family in a lot of trouble. So our information, our stories, our ceremonies, our language was passed down for centuries here, almost exclusively through the oral tradition. Now, you asked a really wonderful question, is, what does that mean as far as the transmission of knowledge, right? I just spoke at a conference. I just had to write up a 15-page conference paper on this subject, and I'm thinking of how to summarize it in my head, because this is something about which I'm very passionate. Stories are meant to grow, to evolve, to stay relevant to a people. And it's a reasonable and understandable question to ask. And I'm not saying you asked this, Maria, but I think this is a question many people ask that has to do with what we're talking about. They say, well, if you're just talking, if you're just using the oral tradition, how do you know things stay true? How do things stay authentic? Right? We've all played the telephone game in elementary school or something and gone down the line, and a story or a sentence ends up very much changed at the end. And they say, isn't that a problem? And what I would offer is, when you take the opposite route, when you write a story down, that really introduces a lot of problems for storytelling. Okay, these stories, these ways, these ceremonies, they have been told for tens of thousands of years and longer, since time immemorial, through the oral tradition without being written down. That is the natural course of how these stories, how this spirituality develops. It's only incredibly recently, with the advent of colonialism, that anything would be written down. Just the slightest historical end, or not end because these stories don't end, but the most tiny historically recent period of the life of these stories. So I would not say that telling stories makes them inauthentic or untrue. What I would say is that the oral tradition allows stories to remain alive and relevant to the people and pass through the people in the times in which they're living, to be told by new youths, and then they become elders and to be passed on again. Joseph Campbell is a mythologist who was hugely influential in my life, still is. And he was giving a talk one time on the relationship between science and religion. And someone had questioned him about, well, this big divide between science and spirituality, or science and mysticism. And Campbell said something very close to this. He said, there's no conflict between science and mysticism. There's a conflict between the science of today and the science of 2,000 years ago, because science continues to change. And when we get stuck with a picture of the world that is 2, 3, 4,000 years old, and we still try to tell that story literally because we've written it down, we've etched it in stone, and we go back to the document instead of the story that is told by our people. When we continue to tell that literal story, now thousands of years later, it causes a disconnect in a people. You're faced with stories that don't reflect the world in which you're living. And I find that to be so incredibly true as a story keeper and as a storyteller. There's definitely a place for writing down stories. Much of my academic work, my dissertation, is very pointed towards writing our stories. But I have to preface that with a whole lot of disclaimers about how our written stories should be used and shouldn't be used. No written document, no matter how many letters is in front of or behind the author's name, or where that document has been published, no written document should be considered the authoritative version of a story. It's just one snapshot in the life of that story that has traveled for who knows how long before, and will travel well after that document is forgotten. I hope I didn't ramble too long on that. I'll stop that there. Henry.
Maybe you spoke about this in the first part, so I'm sorry if I'm making you repeat yourself, but I am curious about the Lenape creation myth.
Wonderful. How many, actually I can't see you all here, but many people have heard of the Earth on Turtle's backstory. Let me change my view here. Oh, there it is. I like gallery view so much better. I can
Yeah,
see
you're on spotlight
everybody.
right now, but I did the same thing.
Oh, did I mess up?
Nope, you
Did I
didn't.
take myself up? Okay.
You're still on spotlight.
So if you ask people about the Lenape creation story, a lot of people will turn right around with Earth on Turtle's back. That's the Lenape creation story, and the world was created on Turtle's Back. That's not technically accurate, at least not with our modern language of stories. Earth on Turtle's Back is an incredibly important part of our story, but it actually comes much later than creation. It's part of our emergence story. And before I judge how long to linger here, Heather, remind me how long we're here today?
We are here till 7, so another 25 minutes.
7, okay. So the Earth is actually, before the Earth is created, it's dreamed. The first being to exist is Kishalamukang, creator. And creator exists, and I always have to say here that in the Lenape language, our pronouns are not gender specific. The pronoun I would use to refer to creator or any other character is neka, and I would use that to refer to a male or female or any other third person. When I tell this in English, I have to make a choice between he or she. Sometimes I'll remember to alternate it, but that's something that's important to say up front. So Kishalamukong, creator, has a dream. And this dream is everything we know as existence. And of course, I'm going through this very quickly, but Kishalamukong awakens and is thrilled by this dream, loves everything in the dream, and decides that it should be real. So creator decides to create what was dreamed. And the first thing creator creates are 4 great Manitawak spirits to help with the creation. And these are the grandfathers and the grandmothers of the 4 directions. He makes these Manitawak, these spirits first, and then the 5 of them get underway creating all things that we know now. Now there's so much that happens, so many places to zoom in during all this creation that's taking place, how all of our animal relations got their names when they came one by one to creator, how Mising, one of our great culture heroes, went to creator to try to stop us two-leggeds from being created, because the animals were like, no, they're trouble. They're going to mess things up. Go talk them out of this. That was a whole thing. And so many other things to zoom in on. But people are often interested in how the two-leggeds were created. And after Mising had his conversation with Kishalamukong, and after a very respectful talk, and also Mising getting hit in the side of the head with a mountain, Kishalamukong decided to go ahead with the creation of human beings. Creator made a tree to grow, and from the root of that tree came the first man, and the tree bent over, and where the branch first touched the soil came the first woman, and that's where the two-leggeds come from. Now, many other things happen. Turns out our relations were right. We do cause some problems. There's warfare, many other things that I could zoom in on. But to fast forward, eventually the world becomes flooded. This happens because there are 2 other Manitawak, 2 other great spirits that are fighting over a charm. This charm weaves in and out of our stories. It's the tooth of a great naked bear, sometimes called the white bear. The humans fight over this tooth and cause all kinds of problems. Now these 2 spirits are fighting over it. And these 2 spirits, the first is a great toad spirit, and he's the keeper of the waters. And during this struggle, his opponent who is fighting him is the great horned serpent, and the horned serpent also comes in and out of our stories many times. The serpent bites Toad in the side, And when he pierces him, Toad, being the keeper of the waters, from that wound, all the waters of the world begin to pour out. And eventually the world becomes flooded. So, yes, briefly, again, very briefly. At this point comes another one of our greatest culture heroes, and you will hear him by many names. You will hear him by the name Muskim, by the name Chamamas. The most popular name, the name you're most likely to hear, is Nanabush. However, Nanabush is actually a name and a very important figure in a different mythology from a different culture. There are many scholars who believe that that name became associated with Muskim, with Chamamas, long after these stories were told. But Muskim went around and started scooping up our people, trying to save them. And then he ends up climbing a very tall tree, just getting out of the reach of the floodwaters. And then everyone finds themselves in a position where, well, now what do we do? We're not going to be drowned, but there's nowhere to go from here. So the earth has to be recreated at this part. There needs to be new earth for our relations to live on. And Muskim sends a few animals down through the waters to try to get some of the old earth so they can use that earth to build the new earth. And finally, after a few animals try and fail, it's little muskrat, another one of our very important culture heroes, little humble muskrat, who is able to go down and bring up some of that old earth on his nose. So Nanbush takes branches off the tree. Nanbush, Muskim, Chamamas takes branches off of the tree, takes that bit of earth, needs somewhere to set them to begin growing this new earth. And Turtle offers. Turtle's just kind of floating there in the water, not really much perturbed by the flood. She's at home, but she says, you need a place to put that. You can put that on my back. I'm steady here. So Chamamas puts the dirt and the sticks on Turtle's back, begins to hold ceremony, and then there's a whole nother ordeal of the land growing and animals being sent out to see if it's big enough and coming back with reports. But eventually the land grows big enough, so the new earth is grown on top of Turtle's back. So I like to tell that whole cycle because a lot of people, like I said, they know Earth on Turtle's back. They know that many Native American tribes, not just the Lenape, often refer to this as Turtle Island, having to do with the land being on Turtle's back. But technically, that's not our creation story. Our creation story is Creator's dream, Kishilamukong's dream, and Kishilamukong and the Manitawak creating things. And then there's the destruction, and then Earth on Turtle's back is part of our emergence story.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, get me talking about stories and I won't stop. Anything else?
I have
Oh, wait, do you have a question?
yes, but I've also asked the question before, so if there's something else we need to move on to.
No, you go for it. Go for it. Go for it.
It was just something that I was thinking about related to the story you just shared, and also what we were talking about before about the evolution of stories and, like the non-staticness of storytelling. And I wonder, like maybe other people notice it, and you and I have talked about this, is like the common themes between the creation story, like the Great Flood and other traditions, is like same, like what you mentioned about the other relations not wanting humans to be created. That's something else I've heard from Christianity and Islam, just like common themes, right? So I wonder like maybe you could speak of that, of like both, you know, how there might be like a higher spiritual truth and common truth about this, but also because of the interaction between like colonialist stories and the Lenape, how that might have influenced stories. Yeah, and I mean, in some of your research, you have come across that. Not that one is good or bad, but it's just like a curiosity that came up.
Oh, that is another wonderful question. And I won't go into it very deeply. And the reason I won't is because that is, and I think, as you know, that is one of my passions, one of my academic areas of focus. I teach classes that are pretty much just on that question. But I think tonight I'm not here to go spiral into my academic investigations. I want to keep this program to representing what is taught in our culture by our people. Now, I will take a moment to say that you can't deny, it's very, very clear that many mythologies and people all across the world, many cultures have very blatant similarities in what they believe. And mythologists and anthropologists and people describe this in many ways. Sometimes, like you began to mention, Maria, sometimes it can be a product of cultures coming into contact. Some scholars have suggested that these were real events, and that throughout eons and eons of telling the story, to loop us back to what we were saying before, the stories have changed a little bit depending on the person's experience, but the elements remain the same. There are other people who would say that there are elements of these stories that are fundamental to being human, that these stories exist within us even before we're born, and the environment just gives them shape. All of those are fascinating investigations, but I think that's as much as I'll say about it here for this presentation.
I had a quick question, which I think you'll delve into more in a future talk. But I was just kind of generally curious about, it's a big topic, what I'm about to ask, I guess, but just generally about, care and healthcare in the Lenape Nation, and what that has looked like over time, and some of the disparities that probably been perpetually in place. I'm kind of curious about that.
That's another fascinating question, and I'll be happy to talk on it, but I couldn't without first saying that our nation is very gifted to have one of our clan mothers, all of our clan mothers, all of our people, but one of our clan mothers is Dr. Ann Dapis, who really, this is her life's work. She publishes regularly in the Oklahoma Observer and in other media on food justice, on dietary concerns that come up from indigenous concerns, both physiological and political. So I'd love to put you in contact with her at some point. Maybe we're actually going to all be talking later through a couple different mediums, through the Friends of the Wissahickon and Arcadia. Those will be online, so I'll make sure you have that information to pass on. Now, I am not as knowledgeable as her, but I've listened and heard her stories often enough to be able to talk on this somewhat. So first, one thing that's incredibly important to realize, and this is actually a bit more in my wheelhouse, is the generational trauma that comes along with being Native American, being an indigenous person in the United States. Last year, I was asked to speak at the 2022 Pennsylvania Psychological Association on this issue. And there are so many things that affect our people, both our diaspora and our homeland Lenape. Some similar issues, some disparate issues. But one thing I like to bring up is that our people and many Native American, if not all Native American people, show a inherited, a generational distrust of systems, especially government systems or systems that have you come into an area and record your data, right? And those of you in the healthcare system recognize that's what we're talking about, right? We go to doctors, they bring us in a room, they sit us down, they ask us to fill out all this information about ourselves. It goes into this computer, and we really don't know what's going to happen from there. This raises a problem. I mean, it might raise a problem for anyone who thinks about it too hard, but Native Americans are continuously underrepresented in going to seek medical attention, going to the doctor, trusting the medical system. So first thing right off the bat, even before we get into what kind of conditions and how it happens, is that any data we try to put forward on our people is going to be vastly skewed. It's not going to be a very representative sample because our people are known for avoiding reporting, avoiding going to doctors. But there are definite things we know. We know that our people are overrepresented with conditions like heart disease, diabetes, alcoholism, depression, right? And this is where the science and the food justice really gets fascinating, depressingly so. I don't know if fascinating is the best word. I'll say interesting, important to think about. So one thing Grandmother Anne will tell you is the ways in which the Lenape physiology was not prepared to digest sugars that were introduced to them through colonial foods. I can't go into any more detail than that. She can. But I know that it's largely because of this that our people are overrepresented in many diet-related illnesses like heart disease and diabetes. Now, to compound that is the fact that so many of our people have been pushed into marginal spaces, pushed into places of low socioeconomic status, have not had the access and opportunity of the dominant cultures, access to healthcare professionals, to education, to learn about best ways of handling these new colonial ways. So to already stack on top of our physiology that is not prepared for this European food, so many of our people have been shoved into areas where their primary diet sources, or what they are able to afford, are packaged foods, Twinkies, cupcakes. Sometimes many of our people are forced to live on government assistance, and that does not give you the most nutritional diet. So that complicates an already genetic predisposition to really falling into, or not falling into, but developing those diet-based illnesses. And then on top of that, you have the generational trauma, right? Our people are overrepresented, like I said, in depression, in alcoholism, also in matters like spousal abuse, deviant or criminal behavior. And all of these things go hand in hand, right? When you are depressed, when you are already coming from a genetic background that is not ready to handle alcohol. And then when you have centuries of this generational trauma of learning these stories and this history of what has happened to your people, that compounds the psychological aspects of the illnesses as well. And then, of course, those complications can lead to overeating, which marries the two together with the dietary problems. It really is, it's a problem. But at the root of all of these problems, whether you're talking about the mental health, the psychiatric health, whether you're talking about the physical health, or whether you're talking about the willingness to go seek help for these concerns, at the root of all of these problems is colonialism and the trauma that our people have faced as a result.
Great answer. All right, we're at 6 minutes before we're done. I don't know if you want to close out with some final words, Adam, or if there's a final question anybody has, but I wanted to give you time to be able to do that if you wanted to.
I'd love to. Does anybody have like a burning question that they were just waiting for me to stop talking so they could throw in there?
Hi.
Hi.
My coworkers, or we're all on the same thing. I am a Philadelphia school teacher. So I'm on with two other coworkers, and we are kind of loving the parts of the curriculum our school district's implementing this year, because fifth grade's reading a book about Crazy Horse. In fourth grade, the kids are reading a book where one of the Native American characters reconciles forced adoption and NICWA, and it's very relevant, and the kids are really delving into all of this. We're learning about the walking purchase in social studies, and we're putting together all of these pieces of like a really culturally aware curriculum. And I guess this is like a long-term question, but how do we do this so it's not something that just gets siloed into Indigenous Peoples Day? Or does that make sense? Like, how do we spread
It
this out?
absolutely does.
And how do we build like these relationships and networks so that the kids understand where their school's located, what was there before, right? So that they're leading land acknowledgement statements. I guess like that's which is a big umbrella, but that's kind of
Yeah.
like where our heads are right now.
No, I love that question. As chief of education, that is really my primary focus, or one of my primary focuses in the nation. I work with school districts, colleges, universities all throughout the Lenape-Hoking on these kind of things. So the answer is to get in touch with us. And Heather, is my information available, or the nation's information?
Yeah,
Or should I put it in chat here?
I am going,
Will you make it available?
I am definitely gonna make it available along with
Okay,
the
great.
recording. And I have everybody's information here of who's here in Zoom. That's why it's good to be in Zoom. So but I will at least make your you want your email available, or just the nation? What would you like?
Well, actually, if this is on Facebook Live to millions of people, maybe give the nation's information. I just remembered that part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Thank you for asking.
You're very welcome. I will do
But
that.
yes, please get in touch. The nation, if you look up Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania, it's lenape-nation.org. You can email us. You can send in a comment through the webpage. It'll come right to me if you're asking about education. And we can talk about anything you like. We can talk about, I work with schools on curriculum development. I work on relationships with Indigenous communities, but specifically the question you asked, how to build relationships so that a land acknowledgement, say, or an Indigenous Peoples Day event is not just performative, not just a box to check off and say, okay, we've done that for the year. Now we don't have to think about Indigenous people anymore. Another very important thing to remember is that teaching Native American and fill in the blank. What is your school teaching? Are they teaching history? Are they teaching culture? Are they teaching presence? If they're teaching history, are they informing students that we are not just history, that we are still a living community? But however your school is framing that, it's important to realize that teaching Native American a Native American subject area does not necessarily mean you're saying anything about the people whose indigenous land you're on. It's wonderful to read Crazy Horse. It says nothing about the Lenape people. It won't educate your students about their indigenous people of the land that they're on. We should read Crazy Horse and all of those big names. But you should also make sure that you're paying attention to the people that are in your backyard and have lived on that land forever. So we're also happy to help with that.
And I just want to say, I feels like I've known Adam for like, 20 years or something. We met last year and it was exactly what he just described. So I work with I run a nonprofit, and we are doing a Lenape, we're working with another organization that's doing a Lenape Native encampment. And I said, I feel like we should definitely talk with folks in the Lenape Nation, maybe. And I reached out to a couple of different sources and then found their website and contacted the contact person. And within like hours, I heard back from Adam. And that's how we got to know each other. So I just want to co-sign on how speedy Adam was regarding getting back to me. And now this is, we've struck up a real friendship, and it's wonderful to have a colleague such as Adam to be able to do these kind of presentations with. So yes, I put all the information in the chat, and you can definitely utilize it to get into contact. And yeah, so Adam, I just wanted to give you some final moments to close out. I mean, maybe there's be a part 3 possibly if we can get you back. But maybe. But anyway, I definitely want to give you some time to talk about any last items you wanted to discuss with the group.
I think that was actually a great question to lead us to a strong point to close on, and that's just that we are active. We are an active community. We keep our traditional ways, we hold ceremony, and we continue to find ways to navigate our new environment with our new neighbors. Reach out to us. We love to have an opportunity to correct the story that has been told about us for so long, all the misinformation that has been put out by history or outdated textbooks. We love to collaborate on protecting the Delaware River and the lands, the watersheds, all the lands of the Lenape-Hoking. So, we're not just an exhibit. We are a people. We work hard for our culture, for our environment, and get in touch. We love to work with our neighbors towards those ends.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. If you're here in Zoom, stay here for a moment. We're gonna remove ourselves from Facebook, but I know there's one more question, so we can take that. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And obviously, a huge thank you to Adam DePaul for being an incredible person, but also somebody who we can really look to in terms of this kind of information and storytelling and stewardship. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you next time. Bye.